Jesus is clear about his purpose. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus enters the synagogue, stands up, reads from Isaiah 61 with one verse from Isaiah 58 squeezed in there, and says that this has been fulfilled in your hearing. In doing this, Jesus does not hesitate. He is not unclear about what he is doing. There are no questions he has about his purpose. And also in doing this, Jesus outlines at the beginning of his ministry what will define his life and his work. He will bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and announce the reign of God. This is his purpose. Jesus is for the poor, for the oppressed, for the blind, and for all on whom God's favor rests. In a word, Jesus is for others. Jesus is for their reconciliation, for others' healing, for others' release from oppression, and for others' inclusion in God's kingdom. And Jesus is for others-ness and is being for others. There is both a spiritual and a physical aspect. He will bring good news to the spiritually and physically poor, sight to the physically and the spiritually blind, healing to the physically and spiritually broken, freedom to the physically and the spiritually oppressed, and reconciliation in both a physical and a spiritual sense. His purpose is expansive and all-encompassing. Jesus is clear about his purpose. We, on the other hand, do not always have such a clear sense of our purpose. One day after school, my sophomore year of high school, I was walking from the school building through the parking lot on my way to football practice. It had been a normal day by all accounts, and then all of a sudden, walking through the parking lot, these questions about my purpose poured over me. Do I know my purpose? What is my purpose? Do I have a purpose? I distinctly remember this moment and a wave of anxiety that swept over me when I didn't have a clear answer to these questions. And it was on that day, my sophomore year of high school, in the school parking lot, that I had my first existential crisis. As a sophomore in high school, most people get their first car. For some, they have their first serious romantic relationship, and others get their first job. Some students go to their first high school party their sophomore year of high school. But my sophomore year of high school, I had my first existential crisis. In case you're wondering, let me reassure you that I did have friends in high school too. But on this day, I didn't have a clear sense of my purpose. Many college students, especially those at Christian colleges like Samford, where I attended, struggle to find a clear sense of their purpose too. In the Christian college environment, it seems that every aspect of life is followed by the question, is this God's purpose for me? When deciding a major, is this God's purpose for me? When considering long-term relationships and the possibility of marrying someone, is this God's purpose for me? When thinking about where to intern over the summer or what camp to work at, is this God's purpose for me? And when contemplating what organization to volunteer with or club to join, the question is asked once more, is this God's purpose for me? In the transition years of college, this question may be heightened, but it is not the only stage in life when this question is asked. When you enter your career, or when you enter parenthood, or when you get married, or when you move, or when you change careers, or when you experience a loss that shifts everything in your life, or when you become an empty nester, or when you retire, this question still looms in our lives, is this God's purpose for me? And even in these moments, this question of purpose can still be hard to pin down. Let's go back for a moment to the parking lot where I had my first existential crisis. Do you remember the WWJD bracelets? WWJD bracelets, in case you're not aware, are the bracelets that became very popular in the 90s. And the letters WWJD are an acronym for What Would Jesus Do? The idea was that if you're faced with some question or situation that you didn't have an answer to in your life, you would be reminded by looking down at your bracelet to ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And then be able to answer that question by following what Jesus would do. When I began to wonder what my purpose was in the 10th grade, I didn't ask, what would Jesus do? If I would have asked this question, I may have landed in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus clearly describes his purpose. But this would not have helped me gain a clear sense of my own purpose. After all, how can I carry out this expansive and all-encompassing purpose of Jesus? How can I bring good news to the poor and healing to those experiencing brokenness and freedom to those who are facing oppression and reconciliation for all in both a spiritual and a physical sense? Simply thinking about all of that being my purpose is exhausting. It is not anything that simply one person can do. Fortunately, bringing good news to the poor, healing to the broken, freedom to those who are facing oppression, and reconciliation to those that have been wronged is not my purpose or your purpose, but it is our purpose collectively as the church. Did you know that Luke and Acts were really written by the same author and intended to be read as one book, sort of a part 1 and a part 2? So here in the beginning of Luke, Acts, in chapter 4, not only is the purpose of Jesus described, but it is also the purpose of the church that is described. The church continues the purpose of Jesus. The church is rooted in this same purpose. The church is for others as Jesus is for others. As one theologian has said, the church exists for the sake of others. And the church is for others' healing, for their freedom, for their reconciliation, and for their inclusion in God's kingdom. The purpose of the church is to bring good news to the poor, healing to those experiencing brokenness, and freedom to those facing oppression, and a word of God's love for those who don't know that they are loved. This is our purpose as the church. Within this purpose of the church is where I find my purpose as a member of the church. I find my purpose within the purpose of the church through listening to the Spirit. When Jesus came to preach at Nazareth, he was listening for the Spirit of God. The text says that he was filled with the power of the Spirit. And then he read from Isaiah and told the crowd that the Spirit had anointed him. Previously in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is baptized and the Spirit descends upon him. And then after that, he goes full of the Spirit, the text says, into the wilderness. Do you see what's going on here? Jesus is listening to the Spirit. When Jim began his pastorate many years ago, or a few years ago, he named his column in the weekly newsletter, Rustlings. I'm sure you all know of this column in the newsletter, Rustlings. Jim said that he named this article Rustlings because standing under the tree that is our sanctuary, he would be listening for the wind of God rustling among us as the wind blows through and rustles through the leaves of trees. When you sit under the tree that is our sanctuary, listen to the Spirit of God rustling in our midst. Listen to the Spirit tell you your purpose. Now, I know us Baptists can get nervous when we start to talk about the Spirit, but don't start shuffling in your seat too much. I'm not going to knock anyone down with my coat in the name of the Spirit. And yes, that has been done before, and you can look it up on YouTube, but you won't see that here. But I will tell you that the wind of the Spirit is blowing among us and is telling you your purpose. The Spirit is not telling you to carry out the purpose of the church as a whole, but the Spirit is telling you to contribute to that purpose. The Spirit may be telling you your purpose is to engage in an effort that contributes to the healing of others suffering from mental illness or physical illness or any other illness. The Spirit may be telling you your purpose is to advocate or fight for the freedom or liberation of those in our community who are facing oppression. The Spirit may be telling you that your purpose is to work for reconciliation across racial lines or economic lines or any other dividing lines in our society. The Spirit may be telling you that your purpose is to make room for and invite those into your life who are different from you. The Spirit may simply be telling you that your purpose is to share the love of God with those who need to know that they are loved. I don't know what the Spirit is telling you to do, but as a member of the church, I know that you can find your purpose through listening to the moving of the Spirit among us. In his book, Nobody Cries When We Die, theologian and activist Patrick Reyes better understands the path that his own life has taken through reflecting on California's redwoods. He says this about the redwoods. The coastal redwoods interlock their roots with other members of their family in order to stand. Their roots are shallow, but they intertwine with the roots of their brothers and sisters. For every family of trees, there is a mother at the center from which all other trees branch out. For me, he writes, this mother tree was my grandma. From her, all of us intertwined our roots. With her, we could all stand tall and build a forest of the tallest trees in the world. He goes on to say that this networking strength, as he calls it, helped him achieve his full potential as he grounded himself in the other trees around him. Brothers and sisters, so it is with our purpose as the church. We are a family of faith. Each of us has our own purpose given to us by the Spirit of God. But as brothers and sisters, my purpose and your purpose intertwine. And the mother at the center of our purpose, from which each of our purposes branch out into the world, is the church. From her, we each gain a clearer sense of our own purpose. From her, my purpose and your purpose become our purpose. From her, we can stand tall and can be a church that exists for the sake of others. From her, I can be continuously rooted in the purpose the Spirit is moving me towards, and you can be continuously rooted in the purpose the Spirit is moving you towards. And together as the church, we can all be continuously rooted in this all-encompassing and expansive purpose that Jesus describes in Luke chapter 4. To bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. This is our purpose as the church.